Thank you. Welcome. And I know you guys have already had a long day and we're at the tail end, but covering a really important topic on dealing with drought, which, as you all know, is challenging, like some of the other issues that we've been talking about. My name is Candace Hasseneger. I'm the Division Director at the Utah Division of Water Resources. And on the panel today, we have Gene Shawcroft, and he actually wears a couple of different hats, including the General Manager of Central Utah Water Conservancy District. He's also the Utah River Commissioner on the Colorado River. And he's the chair of a new Colorado River Authority of Utah, so a couple different hats there. And then we also have Valerie Deppy, who is the new Malcolm, is how she described it, the Chief Compliance and Water Resources Group at the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. And then Tony Willardson, he was named the Executive Director at the Western States Water Council in July 2009 and has served on the council in various capacities since 1979. So I'm excited that they're all here with their, all these experts are here with us today. So I just really want to start and just take a couple of minutes to kind of talk a little bit about the Utah experience this year. 2021 will go down as one for the books. In addition to the worldwide pandemic, wild weather events hit hard, including record high temperatures, flooding, and drought. And we have experienced some of the worst water supply conditions on record. In July, 99.94%. And I just love that it's so close to 100% of the state. I just have to add in that 0.94 because I'm sure that's accurate. But the state was an extreme and exceptional drought, and which are, as this group knows, the two worst drought categories. At the same time, Great Salt Lake and Lake Powell dropped below their previous record elevations. And then we had a wild weather swing from hot and dry in the early spring and summer to intense rainfall and flooding in July and August. The rain helped improve soil moisture, reduce some of the fire risk, and reduce the demand on our systems, but it did little to refill our depleted reservoirs. And we all recognize that it'll take a way above average snowpack to get us to a better situation for next year. So this has obviously been a sobering reminder to the importance of water, and we are, surviving that drought right now. So that's kind of all the remarks I had prepared for you, and I look forward to talking through some of our questions. So we've given each of the panelists about 5 to 7 minutes, so no pressure, and we're going to start off with Gene.
Okay, thank you, Candace. It's a pleasure to be with you. It's an honor to be with you, Candace, in your new role as the Director of the Division of Water Resources. And Valerie, I've known via Zoom and telephone call for 20 years, not quite that long. But today's the first time I've met her, and I've known Tony for a long time, so it's a pleasure to be with all of you. And of course, if you push my button about water, I could be here for a long time. So I've written down a few things to make sure we don't go too far down the road. And I'll see if, there we go, whoops. There we go. Okay. So as Candace mentioned, this was in many regards the worst or one of the worst water years ever. And there was a lot of shortage on the agricultural side, but for the most part, we survived the summer because of the storage. But our checking account has been depleted. You can see from this map a representation, and I know you can't see the numbers in all of these reservoirs, but the red numbers, or the red circles, represent 0 to 20%. That's current capacity. So you can just quickly look at that. About half of the reservoirs are below 20%, and in many cases it's less than 10%, single digits. The orange is 21 to 40%. There are a few of those. 41 to 60% are the yellow ones, and there are even fewer of those. And then the greens, the light green is 60 to 80, and the dark greens are 80 to 100. And you'll notice that Flaming Gorge is about 80%, is what I can see from that. Strawberry Reservoir is still at about 73%. Current Creek is just a pass-through, so that one really doesn't provide any additional storage. And then you can see a couple in southwest Utah that are in the green area. But for the most part, we have depleted our bank account this year as far as water is concerned. The water that was available this year, for the most part, was carryover from prior years, and it's obvious to see that the storage has suffered tremendously. As Candace mentioned, one of my roles as manager of the Central Utah Project, our large reservoir is Strawberry Reservoir. Holds over a little over 1 million acre feet. On a normal year, we get about 70,000 acre feet of natural runoff. Now, there's a collection system that brings water into Strawberry, but just natural runoff, on a normal year, we get about 70,000. This year, we got about 10,000, so about 15% runoff this year. The Colorado River is one that I've become more familiar with, as Candace mentioned. And this year, as the snowpack peaked, which is generally around the 1st of April, there was about a 90% snow water equivalent. So 90% of normal in the snowpack, and yet the runoff was less than 30%. That is what was unique about this year. Generally, if you get a 90% snowpack, even under dry conditions, you'll still get about an 70% runoff. But this year, 90% snowpack, less than 30% runoff in the Colorado River Basin. That was unprecedented. We have never experienced that. And there may be some specific questions in a minute about that, but I'll jump to this slide. We could talk about for a long time, but what I want to just point out is as you look at the left side of this, you can see that line that's going down. That's the actual elevation of Lake Powell. And the little flat spot just before the black line that says historical and future, oh, you can see that well up there. Okay, so May, June 2021, you'll see that was flat. So Lake Powell did not increase at all this year. Generally, it comes up about 50 feet. This year, not at all. The forecast between April 1st and June 1st, 2-month forecast, dropped by more than 2 million acre feet. 2 million acre feet soaked in the ground as opposed to what they thought would hit the streams. And that was because last summer there were no monsoons. The soil was an absolute dry sponge. And if you're familiar with a sponge, if it's saturated, you put a drop in, you get a drop out. If it's not saturated or if it's dry, you can put a lot in before you get any out. And that's what happened to the soil this last year. That happened across the Colorado River Basin. Utah was no exception. And so as you look at these lines, the top line, the dashed bar, is a projection. That's the maximum probable that will flow into Lake Powell next year. That's the one we're keeping our fingers crossed for. The green one is the top one is the maximum probable. The middle one is the most probable. In fact, there's a 50% chance it will be higher, 50% chance it will be lower. Even on that green one, you can see that there's about a 40-foot rise in Lake Powell projected for next year. And then, of course, the red one's the one we hope doesn't happen, and that's the minimum probable. And again, you see that there's very little increase in Lake Powell next year if that's the flow that we actually get. I'll not talk in detail about the other numbers, but on the left-hand side, you'll see a number 3525. That's a critical elevation. When the elevation of Powell reaches that elevation, a number of critical things happen and trigger a lot of operational issues that reduce flows out of Lake Powell into Lake Mead. Other criteria are kicked into play, and if we have some time, I'll explain some of that in just a few minutes. But you can see that both the most probable and the minimum probable cross that line 3525 in about March to April of 2022. When we saw the April forecast for this year, those lines didn't cross 3525 until March or April of 2023. So we essentially lost a year of storage is what's happened. And so we can talk more detail about that, but I'll leave it at that. If there are specific questions, we can cover them. I think my time is up, and that's probably the least amount of time I've ever talked about water. Tony?
Well done.
Oh, one more point, real quickly. As we look at this map that Tony's pulling up, you can see how dry it is. Our best estimates are that it will take about 140% snowpack next year, 140% snowpack to get about 100% runoff. So that just gives you an idea of what we're looking at as far as what we need next year, what we've got our fingers crossed for. Tony, sorry.
And I have a lot of slides, but I'll talk fast too. Drought does continue to decimate western water supplies, and it is impacting all water use sectors. You can see from this Drought Monitor Map what the current situation looks like. There will be a new map out tomorrow. This is a collaborative product of the federal agencies, including NOAA and the Natural Resource Conservation Service, under the National Integrated Drought Information Service, or NIDIS, our system, excuse me. And I'd point out that NIDIS is in large part a result of the work of the Western Governors Association, which was calling for a national drought policy. So NIDIS has been very active in the drought arena, particularly this year. They just today finished a 4-day Southwest Water Forum. They have developed a new website, drought.gov, where you can get more information. But there's been little done when it comes to drought prediction. And NIDIS is actually providing $1.5 million to NOAA's Climate Prediction Center to try and improve our capabilities when it comes to seasonal to subseasonal precipitation forecasting. So we're talking several weeks to months to out years in advance. And as Gene has already pointed out, I was on Lake Powell a year ago. It's not come up. And you can see the impact of the drought on these storage reservoirs, massive storage reservoirs that we have with Glen Canyon and Lake Powell. They've helped us to weather drought over the last 22 years. Water conservation measures are also helping. And we've seen innovative water supply measures that are being taken by states and others, which includes greater water reuse, desalination, and conjunctive use of surface and groundwater with groundwater recharge and recovery projects. But we really can't do much about our supply side situation until Mother Nature cooperates. And without the usual precipitation, we don't have surface water to recharge or to reuse. So we're hoping, or I'm hoping, we're all hoping that the water year, the new water year, which begins on Friday, is going to be better than the last water year. We can't really control then what we get, but we can control what we use. And our choices, though, are becoming more difficult as the water supply becomes constrained. Farmers are fallowing lands, ranchers are selling their herds, lawns are going brown, and we're encouraging everyone to conserve. One of the things that the Council and WGA also did a number of years ago in 2012 was prepare a report on water transfers and water marketing. And those activities are increasing. Much of that water comes from agriculture. And we are all concerned about how do we protect our agricultural communities, rural communities, and the economies that support them. There are limits to what can be done as agriculture becomes more efficient. And water for the environment and recreation, those are also important. But science and technology helps us to define the problem, and it helps inform our choices and helps us define our alternatives. But meteorological and hydrological sciences may dictate our water supplies, but when it comes to water use, those choices are often defined by law. In Colorado, the law of the river, economics, public policy, and politics. Being a political scientist and an economist, I tell my brothers who are engineers and scientists, those are not the hard sciences. They have equations, they have solutions. Whenever you deal with people, there are no clear-cut equations. So one of the things that I want to mention is that the appropriation doctrine, with many of the principles that you have heard before, use it or lose it, first in time, first in right, reasonable beneficial use, and also to note it requires that you do not waste water. It is really an adaptive management strategy that has served us well for decades. It's a way that we allocate water rights, and it doesn't matter what the weather brings or how the climate changes. It deals with whatever water supply we have. It provides certainty, and that's necessary. It is a necessary prerequisite for efficient water markets. So also in 2009, with support from WGA, the Western States Water Council began an effort leading to what we call our Water Data Exchange, or WADE. WADE is our effort with a goal of overcoming the lack of basin-wide and regional water use data and improving the information that we have available for decision makers. Really, we're trying to make that data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable or reproducible. And we've started with water rights data and metadata, which includes ownership, the point of diversion, point of use, and the purpose of use. And we're moving towards aggregate water use data. And you'll note here on the left side is a USGS memo that actually directs applicants for their WUDR, or Water Use Data Research Grants, to use WADE as a template for supplying this information to USGS. We've also moved our data into the cloud as WADE 2.0. And I want to note that we've had significant philanthropic support for developing this database. And what you see here is actually 22 different types of water use. We are working on a common data dictionary. There are many different types of water use that we've consolidated to these 22, which include agriculture, stock water, municipal and industrial, fish and wildlife, and in-stream flows. And a key aspect of this is how this information can be used in the future. And one of the points that I ensured that we had was a slider tool that you can go to priority date. So if you look at this slide, all of those green dots are agricultural uses in the upper basin which predate the Colorado River Compact. The importance of that is that those rights will not be affected by any call on the river that comes from the lower basin because they predate the compact. The other importance is they're going to be very valuable, and there will be a lot of interest in transfers and acquiring some of those water rights. We're also helping states to present their data, to develop more data, and to clean up their data. This is some work that one of our interns did with the state of Utah, presenting for the state of Utah by county their consumptive water uses. And I wanted to put this in here. We've also worked with NASA and their Landsat program. This was me this past weekend at the launch of Landsat 9 in Vandenberg Air Force Base. We have been using the thermal infrared imager on Landsat to measure consumptive water use. This capability actually provides remote sensing for evapotranspiration from vegetation, including crops. So one of the things, and Idaho has been a leader in this area, is these are all center pivots. And they can calculate the consumptive water use of those fields using this remote sensing capability. The other thing I'd mentioned is why it is so important is that there is an archive of this thermal data back to 1982. So if you're the state engineer in Utah looking at a water transfer and you need to know how much water has actually been used by that person on that piece of ground, you can actually go back in time now 4 decades and see what's actually used. And that reasonable consumptive use, actual use, is the only thing that can be transferred. So Landsat 9 is the next step. We're looking for Landsat Next. And We are also working with NASA to make this information easier to use. OpenET is a collaboration between NASA, the Desert Research Institute, and the Environmental Defense Fund to take this big data, map it, and make it available to farmers, ranchers, and other water managers. And this is going to be a tremendous benefit in the future, as we will be able to present this information in WADE and actually correlate your water rights and your field boundaries with your actual water use. And as water is becoming a more and more valuable commodity, every drop counts, and this is going to be important. So WADE, as we see it, is going to help us stretch water supplies and ensure more reliability. It will support water transfers and markets. We're working with our federal partners in collaboration on this effort, and will help us when we look at interstate water issues, as well as enable more applications of the data and the science through objective analysis and modeling. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you, Tony. Valerie, let's have you go next.
Yeah, thank you. First, I wanted to share Wayne Poland, our regional director, intended to be here today and be on this panel, and he sends his apologies. He had a last-minute conflict and had asked me to stand in instead, so I don't have any slides. I do have his talking points, and I tend to talk fast, so this hopefully won't be too painful. It is important conversations like this that will help us find collaborative solutions to the unprecedented water challenges we face today. Reclamation recognizes this water year and the continued drought, coupled with climate change, is difficult for the western states, tribes, fisheries, wildlife, farmers, ranchers, and communities. The Colorado River is the lifeline of the western United States. Colorado River water is used primarily to irrigate agricultural land and for municipal and industrial uses. It serves 40 million people. It is also very important for hydropower production, fish and wildlife, and recreation uses. Interest in the Colorado River Basin is at an all-time high, with continued drought and intensifying climate change driving record low water levels. Critical reclamation activities include the development of the post-2026 guidelines, the continued protection of ecosystems, and water management, particularly drought response efforts. Unprecedented poor hydrology over the past 22 years, and particularly over the last 2 years, accelerated the need for action to protect Lake Powell's elevation. Snowpack in 2020 was normal, but hot, dry conditions resulted in runoff into the Colorado River reaching at just 54% of average. Lake Powell started 2021 half full. The Colorado River Basin then received below average snowpack in 2021, and combined with weak precipitation, dry soil, and high temperatures, produced runoff into the Colorado River at only 32% of average. Under the emergency provision of the Drought Response Operations Agreement, Reclamation started supplemental water releases to Lake Powell from the initial units of the Colorado River Storage Project this July. An additional 181,000 acre-feet of water from Flaming Gorge, Blue Mesa, and Navajo reservoirs will be released from July through December of this year. This is equivalent to approximately 3 feet of elevation at Lake Powell, and we believe it will be enough to protect Lake Powell's critical elevations for the remainder of this year. Lake Powell's critical elevations are 3525 and 3490 feet. Elevation 3490 feet at Lake Powell is the minimum power pool, the lowest elevation that Glen Canyon Dam can generate hydropower. Lake Powell's Glen Canyon Dam generates enough energy to meet the needs of 363,000 households. Operation at or near minimum power pool would damage the hydropower units, disrupt power supply, and eliminate power revenues that fund the operation and maintenance of the CRISP initial units. The Drought Response Operation Agreement defines an elevation of 3525 feet as the target elevation at Lake Powell for minimizing the risk of the reservoir from declining below minimum power pool. This target elevation provides a 35-foot buffer above minimum power pool and balances the need to protect the infrastructure at Glen Canyon Dam. Uncertainty for next year's runoff remains high until the next snowpack develops, and additional water may be needed to address future deficits at Lake Powell. Reclamation continues to closely monitor hydrologic conditions and projections as we work with the Colorado Basin states on a drought response operations plan if additional water releases are necessary. The goal is to have a plan in place by April of 2022. A plan will involve consultation and coordination among all Colorado Basin states, as well as tribes, Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, Western Area Power Administration, and other partners. We have a lot of work ahead of us as we continue to collaborate with all interested parties in an open and transparent manner. We have a strong history of working together to protect the Colorado River Basin and the people and the natural environment which depend upon it. And thank you for the invitation for Reclamation to participate on this panel today.
Awesome, thank you, Valerie. And I know we've talked a lot of doom and gloom this last hour, and I don't know if you all know this, but Executive Director Brian Steed is now Mr. Doom, as he's coined by some newspaper articles. So. Oh, Dr. Doom. Oh, thank you for the correction. So Dr. Doom is who moderated your panel earlier. But the one good news that I think that we have is with all the monsoons that we did get, at least in Utah, I know our soil moisture increased, and we're about at average right now. So, and we're going into the season when we have reduced evapotranspiration, and so we're able to not evaporate as much of that soil moisture. So that's good as we're going into, it's one positive thing I can bring to this group right now. I guess I want to open it up for questions first, and I have some. Reg.
Tony, this question's for you. That Landsat information, can we look at other vegetation types besides just the farms to estimate water usage, like say for tamarisk along the Colorado River?
Definitely. It can also be used to look at forest stress and fuels. It has been used to look at wetlands and delineate wetlands. And another use has been to identify harmful algal blooms. So there are all kinds of possibilities, as well as volcanics, but hopefully we don't have that issue here.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions in the audience? Okay. One of the questions that I was, no, go ahead, please. Oh, okay. One of the questions I was curious about, and kind of your thoughts and reflections on, what have been the major lessons learned that we've seen over this last year? Do you have any thoughts to add to that, and maybe moving into the future? I'll start with the easy one, I guess.
Do you want me to take
Yeah,
that one?
Jean, do you want to start off?
Lessons learned. First of all, Mother Nature is less predictable than we've ever thought she could be. And number two is how grateful we are for those who have been in these positions in the past to prepare storage for us. But for storage, we would have had tremendous shortages this year. We're not just talking agriculture, and I don't mean to indicate that a shortage in agriculture isn't extremely serious. It is. We would have had shortages with our municipal use. We fortunately were able to convince a lot of the folks here in Utah that brown lawns were okay this year. And I saw brown lawns this year, and I've never seen them before. I think we learned that people are more responsive than maybe we gave them credit, but I can tell you this drought was more critical than we've ever seen before either. So that, in my mind, creates an additional burden on us to make sure we put ourselves in a position that 20 years from now, people will look back and say, I'm glad those guys got it right. Because if we are in the new big word I've learned is aridification. And if that's what we are really in, meaning that we have a new normal and the water supply that we have depended on for years is indeed shorted by 20 to 25% from Mother Nature, we obviously have to come up with a game plan. And I'm grateful for those who went before us to put together a game plan that allows us to do what we do. And I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure we prepare for those that are coming down the road. That's what I would share with you, Candace.
That's great. Thank you, Jean. Tony?
Candace, I would just add the importance of planning and actually having a strategy to address these shortages. And as Jean noted, on the Colorado River, after 22 years, we're still supplying water. And if you look at those major municipalities, both in and out of the basin, you know, we're talking about supplying San Diego, Las Vegas, Phoenix, Tucson, Denver, and my friends from Wyoming, I left out Cheyenne
Cheyenne.
and Salt Lake City, and Albuquerque. So, you know, we are all dependent on those flows, and we need to be prepared as we don't know what next year is going to bring.
Yeah, that's great. Valerie, did you have any other thoughts?
No, I mean, I echo what they say, and I think also, you know, the benefit we've had of the collaborative relationships we've developed, you know, the states working together with the federal agencies and being able to be responsive and prepare plans together to be responsive to the current conditions.
Yeah, I really agree, and I have been really impressed with the response that we have from, you know, the drought this year and how willing people were to let their lawns go yellow.
Dr. Doom did his job properly.
Good job, Doctor.
Clearly, this is going to involve some engagement of the end users, the folks that use water. So how effective has some of the messaging been at increasing conservation? And in that regard, what have been the most effective messages?
Do you want me to take a little bit of that?
Yeah, you're in charge of that, you know.
Well, so we, so give you a little perspective for Utah. We have a campaign, a media campaign called Slow the Flow. And earlier this year, last fall, we came up with a great campaign that's called Water is Life. And it was really this value-driven kind of campaign, and it was, it's a really good thing. In general, when we went into this extreme drought, we recognized that it was not the campaign we needed in the moment. We needed a much more direct message, and so we converted that campaign to, you know, we're in extreme drought, pretty much extreme drought, water less. And with the governor came out with a drought declaration, and I think that really helped to increase the amount of people that knew about it, right? It just became a very big deal in the public eye and in the media. So we got a lot of media attention. And then he also recommended to only have 2 irrigations in northern Utah and 3 in southern Utah. So I'd say keeping the message simple and actionable was really our kind of big goals in that effort. And we did see water savings across the state compared to like the last 3 years or even last year of between 15 and 20% just in the 1 year. So, but you saw it driving around. You saw it with people's yellow lawns. Do you have more to add from Central's perspective?
I would just to clarify, are you speaking more of the agricultural water use or the municipal water use?
Residential.
Residential, okay. Yeah, I think Candace answered that very well.
Candace, I might add, as far as agricultural water use, that there are still opportunities to be more efficient. And we're also seeing things like drought-tolerant cropping, as well as more precision agriculture, and deficit irrigation. And there have been some studies that they can substantially reduce irrigation at certain times of the year. Different crops need more water, and you can reduce your water use without having a major impact on yield. And really, farmers, it comes down to what is their bottom line? What is their income? And so there's still a lot that can be done.
I would be curious on that, Tony. Have you seen ways or strategies in which farmers' risk is reduced to actually implement those changes? Because some of those technologies or converting your whole crop to something different may be intimidating for some people who've never done that. Are you familiar with
I think there are
any?
challenges there as well, but I think NRCS and others are showing how that can be done. And I think too, if you tie in the municipal, we're seeing much more activity in the area of dry year leasing, where the farmer will offer his water to the city in a drought. Maybe he doesn't have enough water to finish his crop, and that provides another source of income and some more stability for their farm.
That's great. Thank you, Tony. Any other questions? Yeah.
The question about the end user. In my neighborhood in Salt Lake City, we are the only people who have let our lawn go brown. And there's these lush,
Thank you.
of course, super important to me, but lots of lush green lawns still. And I actually heard of a town, I don't want to name names because I'm not 100%, I can't quite remember. I think it was Tooele, where there was a neighborhood that was actually fining people for letting their lawns go brown. So I know that managing hydrology and managing water bank and all of that stuff is probably like the most impactful thing that you can be doing for planning, but with challenges of people, end users in municipal districts, not really heeding the real importance of this, like what are you, your organizations doing to plan for that? Should we not have a great water year we would not have a snowpack at the end of this winter?
Gene, do you want to start with that?
One of the challenges we have in Utah, and I don't know whether this is across the states, I assume it is, but in Utah we've had a history where the land use planners went in a corner and planned, and the water users went in another corner and planned. And about the last 18 months, the 4 large water districts in Utah, which cover about 85% of the population, have worked with the Utah League of Cities and Towns, which represents all the communities, towns, cities in Utah, 400 and some odd, to talk about a way that we could combine the planning of water and land. There are, as you very well mentioned, there are cities that require a large percent of the lot that is not driveway and sidewalks to be lawn. That's a requirement in some cities still today. I was unaware of a city that was fining people for having brown lawns, but I do know that those are the kinds of things that the water users, the large water districts, are trying to work with the cities in the way of model ordinances, in the way of incentives. Most of the Wasatch Front now will, if you are involved in replacing your grass, your turf with a low water use type of vegetation, you can actually get rebates for doing that. Those things are things that I didn't think would happen in Utah for many years into the future. And yet this year, most of the large communities have those kinds of incentives involved. Some of them are on a pilot basis. Central's, for example, is a pilot basis because we were uncertain about a lot of things. We thought we would implement this in 3 to 4 years. Our board said, no, we're not going to wait that long. We got to do it this year. So those are some things that are happening, but getting to Tony's point, getting people to plan together and not just focus on my little area of land or my little area, my most important area of water in my mind, sorry. You know, having those conversations at the same time at the local level, not a state level, but at a local level where those decisions are made, I think is where we can be the most productive.
Candace, I would say it is challenging, and there is the need to develop this conservation ethic. And I can tell you that having lived in Murray for 27 years on 1/3 of an acre, but watering my grass with municipal water cost me maybe $200 a month. And I moved to Riverton on an unmetered secondary system, which is now metered, thanks to the legislature. I pay about $60 a month. You also have the challenge of folks being asked to conserve, and then, you know, the districts still have fixed costs. So it doesn't matter how much water they sell or don't sell, they still have to make those fixed costs. And you can actually see that rates may go up even as you're being asked to conserve. But I think it's, as we all know, mandates are not really popular. But I think just developing that conservation ethic, and it does take time. And I do have a very long strip that I could flip, so I'll have to look at that.
I know a guy. Just kidding. One other thing to add on to that, and this tacks on right on to Tony's point about rates and, being able to pay your bills for the water suppliers. One of the conversations that also have come out of this is the number of water suppliers talking about, well, we need to look at our rate structure. We've experienced this drought. We've had, issues because of reduced use. How we need to evaluate that rate structure, and is it possible that there could be some drought surcharge in the future? So just will add that to it.
And one of Candace's predecessors, Larry Anderson, I knew he used to take umbrage at times when we were accused of being wasteful because water was so cheap in Utah. And there are reasons for that. We are right at the mountains. The water supply is close. We don't have to move it very far. We don't have to treat it very much. And if we don't use it, it eventually ends up in the Great Salt Lake. So there is that question of most of our public utilities are based on a cost of service. And in Utah, that cost is really rather small compared to other areas such as Tucson that bring water from long distances.
Thank you.
And it's sort of a follow-up to that is what can you guys do if you've got an overzealous HOA that wants, pure green lawns everywhere, or a municipality that wants to do that? Do you guys have any way to influence or affect those kinds of covenants or ordinances?
Do you have any thoughts on that, Gene?
The water districts do not, and that's part of the challenge. We have no land use authority, but we are working with those cities. HOAs can be a challenge because sometimes they have ordinances that require a certain amount of grass. Dr. Doom's going to tell us the real truth now.
Thank you, I do it again.
I thought, Gene, maybe you could ramp down like the cell phone data.
There you
You
go.
just decrease the pressure.
Yeah, that's
Great.
So there will be legislation this year to change that ability. It's up to the legislature to see how successful that is, but there is a fair appetite to do it prospectively. Retroactively, it's going to be harder to do because there's a contractual obligation there that folks are leery of getting in the way of. But we'll take what we can get.
No, that's great. Thank you. Any other questions right off?
Yeah, we might. Is there anything that?
So one thing I think about with drought is just, this conversation is focused a lot on supply and management of water, but have you all seen any effects on water quality due to the drought in terms of, evaporation or low flows or invasive species encroachment? Maybe not in Utah, well, maybe in Utah, but also just across the West, and just speaking to that water quality issue.
Yeah, I'm not a water quality expert, but I know there have been impacts to water quality, increased algal blooms, the reduced flows have, caused a lot of issues there as well. But I don't have specific stats for you.
And I think obviously wildfire and the runoff afterwards has been a big issue for water quality.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting things about drought is how widespread the impacts are, whether it's ag or municipal or, our rangeland, our forests, the impacts are widespread. And it's also considered a creeping disaster, right, where we don't know the exact date it starts and the exact date it ends until afterward. So it is a challenging disaster to try to deal with.
I can tell you that our Duchesne Valley Water Treatment Plant in Duchesne, which is 100 miles east of here, 2 years ago we experienced a fire with some extreme thunderstorms shortly thereafter. The organics that are in that reservoir now that didn't exist prior to have caused us to rebuild the treatment plant. $40 million treatment plant is getting a $26 million upgrade. And it's about a 10 million gallon plant, so it's not a big plant at all. But Starvation Reservoir for years acted as that filter. The heavy stuff settles out. It's not about the clarity of the water, it's the organics that just simply don't settle out now. And in order to treat that water, we've had to go to a direct filtration plant, which isn't abnormal, but the quality was such of a quality that we could go to direct. Now we had to go to conventional. And that, again, that's a huge impact based on the fires, as Tony mentioned, and of course the fires are part of the drought issue. So everything seems to be interrelated.
Kansas, could I make a comment on the infrastructure issues?
Oh, yeah, please.
Obviously, we are looking or hoping to see a bipartisan infrastructure bill come out of the Congress soon, which has substantial funding for the Bureau of Reclamation, for the Corps of Engineers, for many of the other agencies. And I think that's critical, as we have tried to convince over the years folks back there that infrastructure is not just roads and airports and navigation, but water as well, both quantity and quality. And one point the council has emphasized over and over again is the Reclamation Act of 1902 created the Reclamation Fund, which accrues receipts from oil and gas, coal, land sales, other minerals. And at present, the unobligated balance in that fund, money that accrued to the fund but has not been spent, has not been obligated by Congress, is over $18 billion. Now, that's not money that hasn't been spent. Congress has spent it someplace else, and they don't have to increase the deficit by $18 billion. But Congress had this thought through and was going to use Western energy resources to help develop the water that we need. And I think that's another area we need to go back to. We have tapped that fund some for projects for tribal water rights settlements, but I think that is an area where we can say to Congress, look, we should be funding more when it comes to water infrastructure.
That's great. Any other questions?
I would just suggest to this group that we do what we can to support the Open ET, as Tony mentioned. That gives us a uniform methodology to determine what water is actually used on the ground, and that is not a consistent methodology in today's world. Open ET could be a consistent methodology across the states, which would, I think, help things. That's part of some of requests in front of Congress at this point. So if there's any influence that I would suggest, it would be to support Open ET.
Great, thank you. Valerie, any last words?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. Well, call it then. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for having us, and thanks for